Wanted to mention it's coming up on 24 minutes after 8 o'clock, and I've got 38 on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And of course, telephone number for reaching the show 208-736-0300, 208-736-0300. Bill Cawley with you on Magic Valley this morning until 10 a.m. today. Ever hear of Oregon Live? Well, you probably heard of the Oregonian. That's the big newspaper, the biggest newspaper in the state of Oregon. Oregon Live is the online version of it. It says Oregon legislators introduce bill to eliminate proof of legal presence requirement to get a driver's license. Now, they're going to have a two-tiered system. Come next year, because they have to have the STAR card, and the STAR card means that you can get on an airplane, and that you have to go in with your birth certificate, and has to have, as I was told at DMV here, it's got to have a little upraised seal on it in order to get that. But what they're saying in Oregon is what they'll do, you won't be able to get on an airplane with this two-tiered system. What this really, though, this is the backdoor attempt to allow people who might be here illegally to get driver's licenses and then hit the roads. Caller, you're up next. You're on the air on KLIX. Go ahead.
Hey, Bill, there's a Western song. It says you got to know when to hold them and when to fold them and when to walk away, and that's just what Trump did. Thank you.
Hey, thank you. Thank you much for the call. Yeah, the president, he did a Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan did that 30-some years ago in Iceland when he was dealing with the old Soviet Union, and you know what? It worked. Worked out well. I wanted to mention Ken Menzel from the Twin Falls County Sheriff's Department is in the studio with us today as well, and I noticed the look on his face as I was mentioning what Oregon is doing, and all I can say is I got the impression, Ken, that you might have you wouldn't necessarily approve of that.
Was it that obvious? No, probably not. I would say that just in the scope of what we're trying to accomplish is we're out making traffic stops and dealing with the public and whatnot. That it really is helpful when we ask for ID, that the ID that's presented, we understand who it is that we're dealing with, and that we know what's going on, so that we can accurately assess: is this an individual, a wanted individual? Do they have warrants? What's really going on here, so that we know the totality of the situation that we're investigating when we're dealing with the public, and to have an ID card that doesn't truly reflect who the person is that we're dealing with just kind of puts us behind the eight ball. It's just for what we do, it's just not a good idea, I feel.
You know, I don't mean to get things too alarmist this morning. It's tough enough doing your job. I saw a piece the other day online, a professor at a college in California. And apparently it wasn't the first time he did it, but he gave an interview where he said that he'd be happy, I guess, if police officers either died en masse or all were killed. He has been, quote, reprimanded, unquote, by his employer, but that's all that's happened to this guy. Here we go again. That people out there who seem to think that if we didn't have any law enforcement, the world would be a better place. Clearly they're smoking something too.
Well, it couples an interesting article that I saw yesterday that somebody sent to me via LinkedIn. That talks about how DUI laws in North Dakota.
I recognize that guy.
Right. That if we stopped enforcing DUI law, and this is not our state, this is, like you said, in the article you sent me in North Dakota, the political analysis basically said that were it not for the grants the state puts out there for officers to specifically look for probable cause to stop cars that they suspect of driving under the influence of a controlled substance, be it drugs or alcohol, that the DUI numbers would go down, that crime would be reduced. And if we didn't have radars, if we took the radars out of our patrol cars, our speeding problem would go away, right? Because we wouldn't be stopping anybody for speeders, hence there's no problem. If we legalized marijuana, we wouldn't have a marijuana issue, and our jails wouldn't be so full because we wouldn't be seeing that there's a marijuana issue going on in our state. And taking it to what you just mentioned, if we had no law enforcement, perhaps all crime would go away. That really is kind of doing the ostrich thing and putting your head in the sand and ignoring the real problems that face us, and the fact that perhaps while many people have never been the victim of a crime, once you are victimized, whether it's through the tragic loss of life because somebody who is DUI struck in your vehicle and occupants in your vehicle were killed, or your loved ones were killed, or you're the victim of a burglary and somebody breaks into your house and steals your stuff because they're looking for money to purchase the drugs that doesn't so easily come to them because they don't have a job or their drug habit is so high that they have to find other ways to supplement their income to afford the drugs. Until you're a victim of that, I guess there really aren't any problems in our society, correct?
That's what the guy was saying. He said, we don't do this to arrest people for DUI. We do it to make roads safer. And,
Right.
that's the part that people don't seem to understand, that the law is there to get the drunks off the road or to deter them so the roads can be safer.
Absolutely. And, we look at, in one year when I was working on the traffic team for the sheriff's office, in an effort to try and reduce the serious effects of crashes in the Magic Valley, just for what we have control over here in Twin Falls County, we decided to create a pin map. And that pin map, every time we put a pin on that map, it signified where we had a crash. And we looked at our 10 highest volume crash areas in the area. And we started enforcing stop sign laws and speed laws, and our crash rate reduced by 10%. Go figure.
Yeah, I think it's pretty easily understood by most people. We've got a short break. The college professors in California might be the ones who are on the outside. We've got a short break. More with Ken Menzel from the Twin Falls County Sheriff's Department on the way. Bill Colley with you too on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and NewsRadio1310.com. Ken's theme song playing, by the way. We have a hot topic we've got to get into this morning with Ken Menzel from the Twin Falls County Sheriff's Department, and we'll get to that because if we get into it now, it'll obliterate any other discussion we were going to have. So we'll get to the other stuff first. So we're burying the lead. That'll be coming up in a few minutes. It's 8:34. We're at 39 on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and NewsRadio1310.com. Bill Colley with you too on Magic Valley this morning. We were just talking off air. There was a release from the Blaine County Sheriff's Department yesterday, and you could just read the frustration in this. Two tractor trailer rigs decided to bypass a sign that said road closed, only to discover there was a very good reason for that's why you put a sign up that says road closed, because the snow was so deep they couldn't even get 18-wheelers through. So the deputies had to go in and rescue the drivers. And whoever wrote the news release said, this is bad not only for the drivers, but it's bad for our people to have to go in there to get them. That just, you can't convince people that, that they're not only putting themselves in harm, but other people in harm, apparently.
Right. And if you recall, when Sergeant Dan Tom, before he retired, when he was working for us, and we were both filling this position of community relations sergeant, Dan posted a video on our Facebook page, and it was around the time that we had all that flooding that was happening. It especially hit us pretty hard on the west end over in Buell. We had bridges washing out, and we had roadways that were just rivers, torrential rivers crossing over them, and a lot of damage happened over there. And Dan took it upon himself to make a video with a backdrop of a closed road or road closed sign behind him. And it's amazing is we're out there diverting traffic and trying to keep people safe, especially out of those hazard areas. When that bridge washed out down in Mellon Valley, I had just gone over that bridge not 5 minutes before it washed out, and one of our deputies was stationed down there and trying to keep traffic, from going around certain areas. And just the sinking feeling that started in my throat and went to my gut when I thought, what would have happened if I would have just been a little later and I would have been going over the top of that bridge when it actually washed out. Was terrifying. And so, yeah, those signs are put up for a reason, just to protect everybody, not just us, but to protect the people that are out there trying to get to their destination. And we'll do the best we can to reroute that traffic so that you can get to where you need. And that might mean that it takes an extra 15 minutes to get to where you're going, but we want to see you get there safely. And these individuals that, I saw the post from the Blaine County Sheriff's Office as well. And the frustration, you've got a semi-truck that's stuck up beyond its fuel tank in the middle of the snow that's drifting, trying to get to the Arco, I think is where they were headed.
Yeah.
And, it's frustrating. And I've been on patrol before where I've driven down South 93 in a snowstorm where you couldn't even see the front of your vehicle, let alone know if you're on the road or not, and you're worried about, hey, is there an 18-wheeler headed my way, and are we about to have a head-on collision? And it is terrifying.
The food's pretty good in Arco, but you know what? In this type of weather, I can wait until spring to go to pickles.
That's right.
We've got on a more sad note topic, and you lost one of the service dogs in the department, and not all that old, just this past week.
We did. We lost our 6-year-old Belgian Malinois, Drago, who was assigned to Sergeant Hoop. Drago's been with our office since 2014 when we got him as a young pup. And many people remember as Drago became a member of the Twin Falls County Sheriff's Office, his first item that was newsworthy is that he was involved in a crash with his original handler and was at large for about a week as we tried to locate and get him back into the good graces of the protection of a cage and whatnot. And so he was running around out there in that area where the crash had occurred and had been injured in that crash a little bit. And then from there, Drago, his new handler, Deputy Jody Jeske, he was with him for almost 2 years. And unfortunately, his handler, Jody, developed cancer and was out of commission for a while because Jody couldn't work. And then for the last almost 2 years, just shy of 2 years, he was partnered with Sergeant Hoop, who's an amazing, phenomenal canine handler. In fact, he's one of our master instructors at the Sheriff's Office, and did some really good work with Sergeant Hoop, and just a phenomenal dog. And the loss of him will be felt by everybody down there, especially his handler, especially Sergeant Hoop. We've had a lot of outpouring from throughout, not just the Magic Valley, but from throughout the country as that information was posted on our Facebook site. And just want to thank everybody for sending their condolences and recognizing the loss that our agency suffered.
We've got a short break coming up, more with Ken Menzel from the Twin Falls County Sheriff's Department. We're at 39. Subject on the way, guns in schools.
Right.
And not everybody is signed on with that idea. We'll talk about that. Law enforcement has some very specific concerns. That's on the way in just a few minutes. We're coming up on 8:40. It is 40. Bill Colley with you, too, on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and NewsRadio1310.com. You're listening to Magic Valley This Morning. Joining us from the Twin Falls County Sheriff's Department on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and NewsRadio1310.com. We're at 8:43, and it's 40. Bill Colley handling the telephones this morning on Magic Valley This Morning, being a little redundant there. I was telling Ken off air a couple of days ago, we were talking to a firearms instructor who came down from the snowfields of Fairfield the other day to join us in studio, and we got to talking about the notion of having guns in school, and there's a new bill that's been proposed in the state legislature that says, hey, if you've got the concealed carry permit, you could then carry on school grounds. Now, the man who proposed this idea believes it would, be a deterrent and keep people safe. But the flip side of that coin is a lot of people, parents probably, and I'm sure even law enforcers, don't necessarily want more firearms in a school building.
Look, I think it's a noble idea to want to do everything we can to make sure that our kids and our students and teachers are safe in the school. And whatever means we need to adopt to get to that point, I think is always worth taking a look at. The bill is proposed that would allow people to carry with no regard for punishment or consequences, in that they simply need to get that enhanced concealed weapons permit, and once they've obtained that enhanced concealed weapons permit, they don't need the permission of anybody to carry a firearm in a public school. For me, is frightening as a school resource officer. Look, we know there's probably guns, and there's parents and whatnot that probably carry concealed that we don't know about. We live in Idaho. It's a very pro-gun Second Amendment state, and I'm proud to live here, and I'm proud that we support the Second Amendment. As a police officer, though, in the schools, it's alarming that we would take that local control away from school boards and just allow anybody to carry a firearm in the school. And while the caveat to, well, we would only allow that to happen with people who have an enhanced concealed weapons permit, that's not a catch-all. That's not something that just says, all right, you automatically are a trustworthy individual, and we don't doubt that your 1 day of training and firearms instruction makes you a solid person that can carry a firearm into the school. And speaking with the sheriff this morning about this particular topic, we'll do whatever it takes to make sure that we are in compliance with the laws. If that law is passed, then that's what our job is to do, is to support that law. But I echo that same concern on his part, that we just don't know that allowing anybody to carry a firearm on school property is the answer here.
Mike McFadden was here on Tuesday, and he said there are other ways to enhance safety and harden that target, and it wouldn't necessarily be more armed people on the campus. So this proposal is just one proposal, but there must be several other alternatives that could be looked at.
Absolutely, and I'm a very strong proponent of having a school resource officer in the schools, and I know that that's the stance that our agency takes, is having a well qualified and a highly selected individual who is trained in active shooter, and the idea of meeting a threat with that threat, and approaching the individual immediately who would seek to disrupt the school environment and cause harm. Um, I have no doubts that the officers that we have for SROs would immediately address that threat and take care of it. And I think that's a very good part of keeping our campuses safer. Another idea that I strongly believe in is a philosophy called CPTED, Crime Prevention Through Environmental Design. And that goes into taking a look at the schools and looking at all the systems that are in play, whether it's the check-in procedures, whatever processes you have to go through to get into the school, to take care of whatever business you might have, and being there, looking at how secure the school is, that there's only one point of entry instead of multiple doors that are available for access, and that the school can be accessed by 4 or 5 different points. So we want to narrow that down to where you have to come into one specific door to check in there. And then just the numerous other elements that come into play as far as landscape and access control and territorial reinforcement. What are your neighbors like? What's the landscape like? Who lives next door, and what kind of business do they do? And then just looking at the maintenance of everything. Do we have security systems in place? Is it alarmed? Do we have security cameras? And we have those in our schools. And it's just a matter of enhancing those capabilities so that we harden our schools well enough that people won't want to do those types of things. But yet we don't make it feel like you're going to school in a prison, because obviously that's not where true learning occurs. We want to have that learning environment as
No
well.
matter how we felt when we were teenagers about that.
Right.
We've got a caller coming up on 848. Caller, you're on the air with Ken Menzel from the Twin Falls County Sheriff's Department.
Hi, I was just thinking, what about the idea of having a separate concealed permit that is specific to that purpose? And then, like in the medical community, you can't just hold that license unless you have so many CEs or so much time in training, something that has to be kept up. So it can't just be, like you were saying, a one-time class, one-time, being something that is specific to that, so that teachers who feel threatened because they are a high target can feel protected, but the option is available for them to take that training, and they have to have that in order to carry.
That's a very good point, and that's not something that's a new idea that I've heard. I haven't heard that prior to your phone call, and I think you make some very good points. I can tell you that with a lot of the teachers that I've spoken to, they didn't get into the profession to be a firearms handler, to every day have to worry about concealing that firearm on the person while they're engaged in teaching their kindergarten class or their 3rd grade class. They got into the profession to teach. And there's so many teachers that I've talked to from throughout the entire county and the state that have made that comment. I didn't become a teacher so that I have to carry a firearm. That's what you as a school resource officer for, and some of these other systems that have been put into play here, so that I can teach and my students can learn. By the same token, as I've had the opportunity to speak to a lot of people, and these teachers will go to the ends of the earth to protect these kids, because these children are just as if they were their own. So I think that's definitely probably something worth taking a look at, to make it to where it's more than just anybody with an enhanced concealed carry permit can bring a firearm onto the campus. I just think that there's more to look at here than just saying, here you go.
Want to thank the caller for chiming in at that number, 208-736-0300, 208-736-0300. again, you fire 98 shots, you go through the course, then you fire 98 shots, you get your enhanced carry permit.
Hmm.
I see where she's coming from, because if you don't then practice afterward and have good muscle memory, and people are. Mike McFadden said the other day that that he's seen in shootouts sometimes that have taken place, 50 shots are fired before one actually hits the target.
Right.
And these are people who are trained, who are sometimes involved in all of this. So you'd have to have somebody. Maybe you have those people designated in schools. Maybe that's the option. We get back to that notion that maybe you have retired law enforcement, or you have somebody who was in the military who might be teaching, but they would have to almost constantly be training and be ready to do this, versus just because you can go through that course, you get your 98 rounds fired off in the afternoon, and then you're done if you put the firearm away and never take it back out again. 2 years down the road, all of a sudden, you're back to where you started from.
It's muscle memory, and that's why we train so much at the sheriff's office out on the range, to make sure that we have that proficiency. You can't just say, "Oh, hey, I qualified today, whoop-de-woo." You can't. There's so many things that are a perishable skill. As a motorcycle rider, I've ridden in my own personal life. I had a motorcycle that I enjoyed for recreation, and I rode a motorcycle for the sheriff's office. And as I was constantly training and going through the courses and making sure that my skills were just as good as they possibly could be, that first year that I was on a motor, I was great at it. I enjoyed it, and I knew where my abilities lied. I knew what my limitations were. And then when I left the traffic team and took on other assignments, but I still rode the motor from time to time, that skill perished. And I got out on the road, and I was doing a funeral escort one time with our partners over at the Twin Falls Police Department up in Coeur d'Alene. And as we were escorting the body of a fallen police sergeant from the Coeur d'Alene Police Department, and we were traveling through the city of Coeur d'Alene, I inadvertently, when the procession or the motorcade came to a quick stop, I gave it a little more rear brake than front brake, and my bike went into a slide, and the Twin Falls officer in front of me thought that I was going to take him out. And you could see his whole body just kind of squinch up like, oh, this is going to hurt. And I was quickly able to recapture control of my motorcycle and come to a stop. But that happened because I hadn't been training on it like I should have been. And I realized at that moment I have no business being on a police motorcycle, because I'm not putting myself through the rigor of training to be able to handle this bike in a law enforcement capacity. Very different than riding personally, and the same applies to a weapon. You know, when we are out as law enforcement officers doing our job, we're out patrolling the streets, and we're proficient in the use of our firearm. God forbid if we should have to pull that weapon and defend ourselves or the public and shoot somebody. We also have what's called ICRIMP. It's our insurance company that helps us in those situations, especially if it's determined to be a bad shoot or even if it's a great shoot. There's places and legal means between our prosecutor's office and policies that are in place. There's a myriad of things that have gone into play to take care of or address that situation. Those things aren't in play for a school teacher. And what happens if in the heat of the moment and things are frantic and you've got somebody who's, like you said, only fired that gun 98 times and qualified to get their enhanced permit, they miss their target and they hit a kid. Are you prepared with that consequence, with what comes from that? Even if it's deemed that you were doing your very best to try and protect life. I've thought about what might go through my mind if I was involved in an officer shooting and how I would cope with that. And I'm prepared for that, I believe, but I've never been put in that position. Our school teachers aren't in that same mindset. That's not the reason why they became a school teacher. And to think about the long-term effects that could possibly come from that, those are things to seriously consider.
Well, the sponsor of the bill that would allow the concealed enhanced carry permit inside the schools, and I'm not passing any judgment, but he was in a restaurant called Bacon's in the Boise area the other day, and chatting with friends, and they were open carrying. And apparently, according to him, he said the restaurant manager said some of the other customers were upset by that, so the manager or owner pulled the curtain so that they would at least be visually separate from everybody else.
Right.
We should point out, in a private facility, grocery store or a restaurant, they're not subject to the same rules. So if somebody says, he didn't tell them to leave, But if we need to point out, if you're in a restaurant and somebody says we'd prefer you not be here with that, you should leave.
Well, and that's even happened to law enforcement as you look across the national landscape. It hasn't happened here in Twin Falls County that I'm aware of. But there's even been officers that have been asked to leave establishments because while they were on duty and in uniform, it was offensive to some people that there was a gun on their hip and they were asked to leave the establishment. And I've talked to several people who have seen, somebody carrying a big gun that's exposed, that's open carry in a lackluster holster that really isn't set up to perhaps even carry that weapon very well at a local grocery store or a supermarket or what have you. And a lot of people in that circumstance don't feel comfortable. They don't know who the person is. And oftentimes the way that weapon is being displayed or being handled is reckless or careless. I'm all for the Second Amendment, and I believe that everybody should have the right to carry and bear arms, and so does the sheriff. Let's make sure we're doing it responsibly.
I was going to say, that if you are asked to leave and you don't, then you face a trespassing count.
You do, yes. Because it is private property, the owner of that establishment does have the right to ask anybody to leave. You've seen the sign, no shoes, no shirt, no service. That would apply to a firearm as well.
I grew up in a town where we had a lake, and a lot of summer traffic would come in for the lake, and the grocery store that was nearest. First time I ever saw that sign was in the summertime. No shirt, no shoes, no service. I picked up on why right away. And I was just a little boy because people would be coming in from the lake and they would be walking through the store in their swimming trunks in bare feet. And, first of all, I'm sure that violated certain health codes. And number two, the other customers really don't want to see dripping wet people with a lot of chest hair walking around the grocery store while they're trying to shop.
This is the food that I'm buying. Come on, have some respect. Absolutely.
Got about a minute left. Very quickly, we're not done with winter yet. We're probably going to get some more slick and sliding roads, and we had a period about a week and a half ago where we went through about 3 or 4 days of that. Most people handled it well.
Yes.
But we still have a long ways to go.
Yeah, we do have a ways to go, and it's really muddy out there now. And we're seeing some farm equipment hauling stuff around the valley as well. Just be very careful. There's still lots of snow up in the South Hills, lots of snow. So just remember some of those things we talked about the last time I was here, making sure that you have the right things in your vehicle to be prepared in case you happen to get stuck or stranded. Flares, flashlights, food. That's the biggest one, is making sure that you have some non-perishable food and some water with you so that if you are stuck out there for 3, 4, 5 days, you have a way to get through it.
We want to thank Ken Rensel. We'll see you again in 2 weeks.
Yes.
Unless something urgent comes up.
That's
we
right.
might have to see you in between.
Call me at 3 a.m.
We've got a break, and Pastor's Roundtable is on the way. News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. It's 38 at 8:59. The news is coming up next.